Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends Sam Clement and Courtney Trust. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, John.
Hey, guys. This week, reading the various news outlets, it seems to me that the administration is again going to go after the so-called gig economy and try to get all those people that work for an Uber or Lyft, and there's a myriad of others, so many apps out there I can't keep them straight, and turn all those people from independent contractors, which is how they're currently legally classified, and into employees. And I'm not exactly where this is going or why this is so important for the administration at this time. Sam, do you?
It seems like there'd be kind of bigger issues right now, but this is obviously something that has been growing as a part of our economy, whether, we've talked about through the labor numbers and whether those are as accurate as they could be. It's gone on for decades in some fields, but really, like you mentioned, Ubers and Lyfts are kind of the obvious ones, but there's a lot of ways that people can kind of join in the gig economy, and some of these ways aren't being taxed, and I think that's a big part of it, is that the government wants their money, or what they view as their money.
And is it a means of them being able to track it more clearly?
I think so. And, I think some of them, like Uber and Lyft, again, using just the easy examples, probably do have a, 1099 you get at the end of the year, I would assume. So that's not necessarily who I'm talking about, but really trying to get everything under the umbrella of the IRS and get all the money they can get from people, I think is...
Well, the thing is, most of these people, in my estimation, most of these people that do participate in the gig economy, or at least the gig economy is the majority of their... household income, are probably those people on the lower income spectrum by and large and just in general. And so, Courtney, I went to the Pew Research Center, or whatever it's called, and I took a look at exactly who performs most of the gig work in the U.S. economy. And this is according to Pew Research. Of all U.S. adults, about 16% have done any sort of gig platform work, almost equally divided between men and women. 12% of whites, 20% of blacks, 30% of Hispanics, and 19% of Asians. And those are the terms that Pew uses. I'm just reading off here. Ages, 18 to 29, 30%, 30 to 49, 18%, 50 to 64, 13%, and 65 plus, 7%. Upper income people, 9%, middle income, 13%, and lower income, 25%. I read all this out to you because really, if you were to kind of ball it all up, the average U.S. worker doing gig work as their majority income, at least from what I can tell from the Pew Research, is someone that's not making a ton of money already, and then also someone that is young. And so
kind of lines up,
and more likely than not a minority. And so that to me is kind of like, if the government's trying to get all these people underneath the guise of the IRS, or at least the IRS can track this, the majority of these people aren't going to be paying income taxes anyhow.
It also, to me, though, seems like beyond the income tax, I do think that's a part of it, is kind of this union-esque sort of thought process behind it, protecting people from the companies and making sure they're getting all the benefits that W-2 employees are. And I think that is also kind of the flip side of the same coin for why they're trying to push this through right now.
Well, and I think when you go back to why unions were created, it made sense at the time of making sure that there were clean working environments, that people were paid fairly for the work, the working conditions were safe. But that doesn't necessarily... That's not an issue necessarily with gig workers.
I suppose not.
Well, and I think also, I don't know how many Uber or Lyft, and I know that's kind of what we're focusing on, even though there are other areas.
Those seem to be the low-hanging platform. I mean, they're babysitter gig apps. You can deliver stuff for Amazon, just periodically.
Yeah, Uber Eats or whatever.
All that stuff. So there are any number of them. But Uber and Lyft get the kind of, they are sort of the Xerox, the Polaroid, what have you, the Band-Aid, if you will.
The Ubering.
Yeah, people get an Uber. They are the low-hanging fruit when we talk about the gig economy.
Yeah, and at least, I'm always very curious about that industry and people who choose to do that, and so a lot of times I'm the person that wants to talk to my Uber driver or Lyft driver the entire way, and kind of get their life story.
Is that before you get to the restaurant or after you come home?
Normally that's before. Yeah. After I'm not talking as much.
Very sleepy. You get very tired.
Yeah. But hearing different stories. One of the drivers had talked about how, oh, well, if there's a big concert, like in Nashville, like she tracks like where the concerts are, and she'll drive up and stay the night in a cheap hotel and basically drive. And she said, I'll make $600-$700 in 2 to 3 day span. And she's like, that'll hold me over for the month of like any extra things when it comes to rent or food, or if she's got Christmas presents to buy. And so she just does it throughout, and her husband watches their children.
Yeah.
And then another one that picked us up was he was retired, and he was like, I just miss interacting with people, so this is something that I just did on the side. He didn't really need the money, he just enjoyed it. And so I think that if you try to unionize it, it takes a lot of the luster for people who just want to do this on the side. They don't want to have to pay into anything. They don't want to be unionized.
So do you think they shouldn't be employees of these companies?
Well, I just think that if they are asking to be unionized and they are asking for a vote, that's one thing. But I don't like that the government's dictating classification. There's not necessarily been interest.
This isn't kind of a new, they back in, I think it was the 40s, determined what it took to be considered a salary employee of the company, or an independent contractor.
Special skill and all that.
Special skill, like your own, you control a certain amount of it yourself. You make investments in it yourself, like buying your own car if you're an Uber driver. And that seems like it had been pretty clear. And then the previous administration kind of hammered home more of the fact that, it's based on how much you want to work. And then now the current administration, what we saw the past couple of days, that's been creating all the fuss for these gig economy companies, is the focus on whether you are dependent on that company to make your money.
Well, and that this will increase costs for companies. And if it increases costs for companies, then that's going to eventually go to the consumer. And it's all about supply and demand. If the demand is no longer there, right, then it's going to drive people out of it.
It also begs the question of, if I'm my own independent contractor, I could go do 2 routes a week and be fine with that. Run to the airport twice and back, make a little extra money. If I'm an employee of a company, no employee of a company really gets to say, hey, I'm just going to come in 2 hours this week. That's really all I feel like doing.
And that's a huge chunk of it, which I think maybe the administration, maybe they're either not thinking about it or they don't care about it, is part of the reason why gig economy work is attractive to a lot of people, not just employers, but also employees, is the flexibility that it gives. Like the example that you gave, the woman goes to Nashville or what have you, makes $600-$700 over a weekend. The gentleman that drove me and Beth to dinner last night, a guy named James, he's retired, does it for extra cash, and frankly, he said, I have fun with it. I don't drive after 11 o'clock or something like that, so I don't have to deal with the drunks, and I make a little bit of money besides. So I'm taking a look at the reasons why people do the gig work. Here are the ones that Pew Research said, percentage of respondents who say each of the following is a major reason why they've done this over the last 12 months. The top one, 56% said wanting to save up extra money. Mm-hmm. Notice that's not, I want to buy baby formula or cover the rent. I want to save up extra money. Again, Courtney, going back to your example, needing to cover gaps, changes in income. Okay, a gap would imply sort of a temporary shortfall, but that's flexibility. They could have another job. They're just looking to add a few. $100 doing Uber Eats or something like that once a week. It's good. But 49% said being able to control their own schedule, and 35% said wanting to be their own boss.
And I think that's a big value add to this that you lose by being an employee is most of these people we talk about, or a lot of them at least, it's on top of a normal job maybe.
Most of them, yeah.
They work a job and then they do this in the hours where people don't typically work salary jobs.
Yeah,
and I think, again, you can very quickly lose that flexibility of saying, if I work 9 to 5 but I need a little extra money, I'm going to do this from 8 at night to midnight. Now they're going to tell you, hey, we need drivers from midnight to 4 in the afternoon.
If I were a young person, I'd strongly consider it. I've taken a look again with the Pew Research, who I happen to like anyhow, but it's a great report. Some 68 to 70% of all gig workers it's a side hustle.
Yeah.
Very few of them are actually, this is my main thing for work. So all of a sudden, these people become employees. That little 2 hours a night, or 10 hours for a full week, what have you, make a little extra money when they're not doing anything. All of a sudden, instead of them being able to control that, they got someone else.
Right.
Uber saying, "Hey, you're doing this 3 hours on Wednesday night, and by the way, you're doing it in these 3 zip codes."
Well, and we already know this demographic of individuals, the younger demographic, the 30% that you mentioned, 18 to 29, they don't want the brick and mortar like office. They have to check in, check out. So we already have a shortage of the labor force.
Yes.
And realistically, I think all of us could hopefully agree that these people are going to be like, forget it. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to, I'll do something else. And that's what, you think about the flexibility that y'all even say, like, you can say, you know what, there's a party tonight that I want to go to. Or, hey, my kid's sick. I'm not going to work today. And it's not a big deal. You don't have to get coverage. You don't, not show up and get fired. You just choose not to be available.
What you will probably see if this does happen, you'll see black market or undercover sort of gig type work.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's not all that terribly different than there are certain universities here in town that have the list of babysitters, which that is gig work. I mean,
Yes.
and technically, if you were to truly follow the rules of the IRS, you're supposed to take out withholding for your babysitters if this is the case, if this is what the administration wants to do. So babysitters, yard crews, all of a sudden we don't have independent contractors anymore, and people lose flexibility, and frankly have to start paying a bunch of money in tax that they didn't want to spend in the first place, which is a reason why they took this particular job.
This isn't a new phenomenon of government getting involved in new things and creating more inefficiencies. I mean, there's going to be unintended consequences, and that happens every single time that government organizations get involved with things.
But do you think the messaging, obviously, from the White House is probably not, well, we want to make sure that we can tax you. The messaging
it's to
is
protect workers. I think it's more the same thing that is sold with unions.
Do you think it's also, I know when I was in London, I ended up taking a taxi. And I know that there have been, in large cities, New York, D.C., issues of people who are taxi drivers and unionized, frustrated with Uber and Lyft options because it's cutting into their profits.
Well, actually, most of what's weird about the taxi industry is, I don't know how it is in the UK, but the way they are a lot here, and people who work in salons and what have you, they're independent contractors. The woman that cuts your hair, Courtney, or the man, more than likely rents the chair from the salon for the day, and then they've got to make up the difference.
But rates are typically set, right?
That's right, but that's the way most taxi companies operate. And you go to New York, you'll see a medallion on the hood of a car. That means that person owns that car. They're just renting out their time to Yellow Cab or what have you. So a lot of these people are actually independent contractors already. Does this type of work, does this type of legislation turn them into employees as well? And so it's not just the gig economy with the Uber, the Lyft, and all that stuff. There are a ton of people out there that do independent contractor type work. And all of a sudden, this opens up a whole can of worms for a bunch of people that, hey, I don't really want this. I like my own flexibility. I like the money I'm making. The salon's not going to pay me the same as I can actually make on my own, more than likely. And I don't want to be someone else's employee.
Sounds like unintended consequences.
And that's the way it really kind of is when you try to put some kind of constraints or regulations on really anything. A regulation or a constraint is nothing more than a cost add to an economic situation.
Well, sometimes it's warranted. I'm not saying it is in this situation, but...
Like when?
Well, I mean, I think when you go back to why unions were actually created, and back in that time period when you did have very unsafe working environments, people were not paid fairly, and there was a need to unionize and to advocate for their rights against employers.
But I think you also saw the benefit of companies just going out and doing what's best for their own. I mean, you go back 100 plus years. I mean, Henry Ford paid about double the average wage of what other people were paying back then. And what that meant was a stable workforce. It meant happier workers, better output, more stability in their workforce. I mean, back then I think they were getting paid, I think in a week, like essentially an equivalent of an ounce of gold.
But you're
You know, I
assuming
mean,
that's like the assumption, right? That the
a goal.
company has their workers' best interest at heart. That is not always the case, and so that's a great story. But there's probably 10 plus stories of the exact opposite.
Well, the thing
of
is,
like the company trying to be as cheap as possible with their.
I mean, it's snowing in
employees.
here, I think. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
Courtney, you're right to a degree. I would say any successful company has will put the interests of the shareholders first, or the owners first, because that's why you go into business, is to generate a profit. And the best way of doing that is to ensure that you have an engaged and enthusiastic workforce. And in order to do that, you need to treat them fairly. So when you take a look really at some of the best companies out there, and the ones that are the iconic brands that we talk about a lot at Oakworth Capital Bank, I think, take a look at Chick-fil-A. The workers behind the counters are really kind of a notch above most other fast food restaurants. My understanding, they pay a little bit more, they train a little bit better. You can say the same for the people at Starbucks, or even the
Didn't Starbucks just try to unionize?
well, those are
It's a
individual
store.
ones. But like the people that work at a Ritz-Carlton or what have you, these people are all better trained, better paid than, say, like Ritz-Carlton, someone that works at a Quality Inn or something like that. Not to knock Quality Inn, but you get the point. The better you train, the better you treat your employees, the better likelihood that you have of having a successful business model.
Right.
All right, dead space here. All right. But going back to the gig economy, all of this is going to be horribly ironic, and I'm not exactly sure why the administration wants to push this at this particular point in time with an election coming up in about a month, when I think this will ultimately be pretty unpopular with a lot of people
Who would be voting for
who
the
would probably be
incumbent,
voting
yeah.
more Democratic
Yes.
if the polls are accurate. Younger people in general tend to be more liberal than older people. So this detrimentally impacts those younger people who are doing the vast majority of the gig type work. And I'm not sure why the administration won't do it. Sam, your thoughts? I mean, here you are the youngest person. Now, granted, you are the most cynical person of your
Yes.
generation.
As Courtney has labeled me.
Yes, without a doubt.
I'm fine with that.
But what do you think people of your generation, and I'm sure you know people that have occasionally done DoorDash and what have you, what they would think about this?
I know a few, but more than that, I think people are, if they see these unintended consequences that we think are going to happen, and higher prices and maybe less availability in the times that they need it, that's what's going to matter to people. I mean, at the end of the day, I think my generation specifically, I mean, money talks a lot more. I mean, prices talk. I mean, people talk about wanting to have the most fair working conditions for, gig economy workers. But at the end of the day, when it starts costing 50%, 100% more, I think that's going to matter more.
And you mentioned, Courtney, something about Uber and whatnot. I don't think Uber or Lyft or any of those rideshare apps are completely inelastic. So, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of at that, do I take an Uber or do I just have one glass of wine at dinner or something
Right.
like
I have
that?
that for tomorrow. We're going to the airport in the morning. Usually we like to take Uber just because it's easier. You can pull up right to the front. But I'm like, depending on what it is, at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Well,
I
see,
mean-
and that's the fear too, is that, and my point about bringing up London was the fact that the person in front of me had called an Uber driver and they kept canceling. And then we were trying to pull like Uber drivers and they kept canceling, and it was like, forget it. Like, let's just use a taxi. And the same thing, like anytime I have an early flight, like I don't trust that there's going to be someone available and that they're not going to cancel. And then you've got this you're already anxious because you're traveling, and it's just not as reliable. So I think for the consumer, if you paid a little bit more for the reliability, but I think part of the reason why we don't have reliability is because there's not enough the labor force, there's just not enough people out there at that time, or just in general picking up as much of the demand.
Yeah, well, and I got to tell you, I mean, I made that example with the Uber and how it's really almost at that market clearing price
Yes,
for me
I'd
right
agree.
now.
Yeah.
It really is. So if Uber
We've
makes
stopped using it as much as we used to.
If Uber makes it much more expensive, I'll probably make some changes there. I mean, that's me. That's not everyone.
I'm with you. I mean,
But I will also tell you the same with DoorDash or Uber Eats. They charge a
Let's get out of
premium.
hand.
Well,
It is.
they charge a premium on the food already, and then they charge a delivery fee and other fees on top of it. There's a great restaurant named Chen Express over in Crestline. I'm just going to throw it out there.
We know, John.
Chen Express. I like their food. For some time, I was just like, oh, well, I guess I'll just order through DoorDash. It's kind of easy. They already have my credit card, all that stuff. And then the other night, Beth goes, dang, gone. That just seems so expensive for that. It's like a $3.25 for an egg roll on the app. So we went to the website, and everything's like magically less money. And so we saved by calling up the store and saying, y'all still offer delivery, or was it through DoorDash? They go, no, we have delivery. We have delivery people. We saved like $15 on the order. So,
yeah, I mean, think about Chick-fil-A. I mean, talking about an iconic brand.
Yeah.
They started doing their own delivery. And that's pretty brilliant on their part because they're able to cut costs and having a driver and it's still fresh. They can kind of have a little bit more of that quality control. Because I know we've all probably ordered something that's arrived cold or it's just not as good. And you're like, I paid a premium and it doesn't even taste as good because it's been sitting in someone's car because they tried to group a bunch of orders at one time.
So I guess here we are kind of closing with this, that the administration can do this. And the administration, or Washington, it could be the next administration before it goes through. It can be the next Congress. But it just happens to be this administration that's pulling it up at this time. If they get this through and all of a sudden things become more expensive for the consumer, which they more than likely would, then all of a sudden what we would likely see, and as Wall Street Journal said in their op-ed today about it from the editorial board, you'll probably see a lot of these gig jobs disappear because they've become a little bit too expensive for the consumer because most of these are already at the market clearing price. Sam, do you disagree with that?
No, I agree. I mean, like we said, I'm seeing it. I feel like I'm at that kind of breaking point on a lot of the prices. So, yeah, 100%.
And the thing is that I feel like even though you say, okay, everyone's at the breaking point, you also have to look at the people who are making that extra income. What are they doing with that money? They're putting it back into the economy. And so that's also income that you're now going to say is not going to be there. And
well, it's money that I keep, and I get to spend something else. And, money that the vast majority of these people are young and lower income. It's money that is not being transferred from me to them. So that's not necessarily good for them either. So I really hope the administration will rethink this and think about all the various negative outcomes from this. However, I'm not exactly sure that they will. Politicians don't get paid to understand economics
Clearly.
in a lot of ways. It doesn't really matter which party you're a fan of. Even so, I mean, regardless of political persuasion, when you do put regulations on business, when you put extra costs on employers, generally the people that end up paying for it the most aren't the consumers, it's the employees themselves. And this is one of those instances. Well, guys, thank y'all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you all. So if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always reach us by dropping us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworthcapital.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. Of course, if you're interested in reading more, hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of exciting information. With that, guys, do y'all have anything else to add?
No, that's it, John.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.